Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 36 Lessons podcast, an Elder Scrolls lore podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Rory, and I'm here with my friend and fellow lore enthusiast, Andrew.
Thank you for not using Loreologist again.
Yeah, I modified it. We're making small changes.
Yeah.
So it's been a little while since we've been on here doing one of these. But to make up for the time we've missed, we've actually decided to indulge in audience requests of topic. Considering last week we said we were sort of delaying those until we can get around to them. But one of the we were originally going to do this episode on the Thieves Guild, but one of our audience members requested that we do a Mages Guild episode, and we thought, that would be a good topic going in from our last episode after doing Dark Brotherhood.
Yeah, and I mean, the Mages Guild, it's not personally one of my favorites, but the history is very interesting.
So that's exactly the way I feel about the Mages Guild, actually. It's definitely, in terms of gameplay, they've never been my favorite quest lines, but in terms of like the lore behind them, I actually think they're one of my favorite guilds for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we should start off talking about where most people are probably familiar with the Mages Guild, because most people are familiar with Skyrim. And Skyrim has a Mages Guild quest line that sort of touches on a lot of things that are very important, but it does so, like, it's a very cursory look at those things.
Rory, Skyrim does not have a Mages Guild quest line.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
In Skyrim, we see both the successors of the Mages Guild. We see a member of the Synod or Synod order, which is a successor, and we see the predecessors, or one member of the predecessors of the Mages Guild, which is the Psijic order.
Yes,
but the Mages Guild themselves do not appear in Skyrim.
That's true, actually. Yeah, technically you're right. So we see, as sort of, I think is that in the pattern with Skyrim, we see like what happened to a lot of guilds after they stopped being good at what they did, or were driven out, or whatever the case may be. Because of course we talk about the Dark Brotherhood on our last episode, and how much worse they're doing in Skyrim, than they were before.
A point gets brought up a lot online, and it makes sense the more you think about it. The point is that Skyrim is very much a post-apocalyptic video game.
I agree with that.
Everything up until the Oblivion Crisis in Elder Scrolls 4 is this, typical fantasy. Well, I'm going against what we said in the first episode, but it's this pre-apocalyptic fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
But the Oblivion Crisis is meant to be this continent-spanning thing that just wipes out most of established civilization. And Skyrim, which takes place 200 years after that, civilization is still very much trying to pick up the pieces.
I agree, and I think the fact that Skyrim is a lot of people's only exposure to Elder Scrolls, kind of, like, I get why they did what they did, and it makes a lot of sense if you've played the games previously, but it's kind of an odd game lore-wise to start out with.
Yeah.
you're missing quite a bit of what actually goes on Tamriel in Skyrim.
Mm-hmm.
Although there's a lot of allusions to it. And they do cover, like, through that quest line, they cover a lot of small individual bases. Like you say, they mentioned the Psijic Order, which is a really significant part of the Elder Scrolls universe, even though it's a mysterious part. And I guess we should probably start with that.
Yeah, that's where I had planned to start. So let's do the intro first, and then we'll get started there.
Perfect.
Okay, so the Sijic Order. Rory, do you know when these guys started up?
So I don't know the exact date they started up. I know that their first like record was in very early on in the first era. So it's safe to say that they're very old, and I know they were started by the Aldmer. So if you don't know, like in Skyrim, when you see all these different, the Altmer and the Dunmer, one of the things that you don't really see is the fact that all of these are sort of, I'll say, evolved, even though it's kind of improper. They're evolved out of the Aldmer. They're like the first, Mer race that sort of eventually, split off for a variety of reasons. I think mostly geographical, and became the various elves that you see and other Mer that you see in the action of the Elder Scrolls games. So they were the predecessors, and they started this order, the Sijic Order, which is it's kind of like, the Mages Guild you'll encounter in Oblivion, or the successors you'll encounter in Skyrim. But one of the most interesting parts to me is that I've tried to read into this as much as I could find. They don't use the classical Magicka approach to magic. They have their sort of own approach known as mysticism, which, as I understand it, is more a manipulation of nature than a manipulation of magicka. Though I'm unclear on the specifics of how that works.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about the School of Magic mysticism, that's
Yes.
more or less what it is.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Now, that's not a school of magic you're really going to encounter if you play Skyrim.
No, mysticism
it
was
just never really
absorbed
touched
into
on.
the other schools of magic.
Yes, that's
Same
right.
with
Yeah.
thaumaturgy, which existed up until Morrowind, I believe.
That's right. I believe yes.
Or
Yeah.
it was
Yeah,
in
there
it was in Daggerfall, but not Morrowind.
Yeah, I believe there were originally 8, and it went down to 6.
Yeah.
I think is the way the numbers worked out. But as one of the things about the Sijic Order is this has to be noted in a discussion about them, that they were extremely powerful.
Oh yeah, well, they're widely considered the oldest and most powerful factions on Tamriel.
Yes, exactly. And but they were also very, I'll say, isolationist. They didn't have, come to your school and open recruitment policy kind of thing. They were somewhat private, though I do believe one of the things that's worth noting about them is they weren't restrictive on race. Like, I believe there were recorded even like Nordic Nord people in the Sijic Order at some point.
That's probably further down the line.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. Well, because when it just started out, the Aldmer are very, very old.
Yeah. Well, in my research, the Sijic Order kind of split off. It was formed by dissident elders that weren't happy with certain religious changes going on during the first settlement of the Somerset Isle. And they all picked up and moved to an island in the archipelago there called Artaeum.
Artaeum, yeah.
Yep. And that's where the order started. So if we take the early settlement of the Somerset Isle as a time frame, that would put it in the Merthic era.
Yeah. And this so it's very old. It also spans a couple eras too, and I guess
they're still around when we see the guy in Skyrim, which is in
that's
the
true,
fourth
yeah.
era. So
in some form or another. Although
Yeah.
they're sort of, and this is one of the things that we have to point out about the Sijic Order. They're always sort of shrouded in mystery. They're always on the periphery of what's happening, even though it's believed that they've had a great deal of influence in certain critical historical events.
Yeah.
So I guess we should talk a bit about what the Sijic Order was doing and how this eventually is going to wrap around to the Mages Guild.
Well, if we pick up from there and Not a whole lot happens between there and the second era, unless you
Yes,
know
exactly.
something that happens.
No, I'm not
No.
aware that part of my knowledge of the Elder Scrolls history as it relates to the Psijic Order is pretty sparse. Actually, the next thing I know that I'm aware of is in the second era with Vanus Galerion.
Yeah. So his original name was Trectus.
Mm-hmm.
He was born into a life of servitude for a lesser lord, and so he runs away when his father is killed at the age of 11. And
Yes.
a mystic by the name of Heliand, I believe that's how it's pronounced, he recognizes the potential in Trectus, because Heliand was trained, or he was trained in mysticism on Artaeum. That's the island where the Psijic Order is. So he sees the potential in Trectus, and so he brings him to Artaeum,
Yes.
where he is accepted into the order and becomes a student, and he's given the name of Vanus Galerion.
And he was educated actually, which was not I believe that was not approved at the time. I believe that's why his father was killed actually.
Yes,
Was,
he was
for,
taught to
like-
read and write.
He was taught to read and write, so that's why he had that's part of the reason why he had the knowledge he did to be able to show off is because his father ensured that even though he was considered of a lower class, that he was still educated. And yeah, so after being brought into the Psijic Order, he became buddies with a fellow student named Manimarco, who would sort of who ends up playing a very significant role in the history of the Elder Scrolls world. And they learned together. But one of the things that you'll sense, even in Skyrim, if you play Skyrim, they allude to the fact that not all schools of magic are created equal in terms of their respectability to study. Some are considered sort of improper or
The dark arts.
the dark arts is yeah, exactly, which is a common theme in various fantasy universes, that there's some things they just don't look into. And Manimarco had a particular interest in the necromancy, which was not considered acceptable at the time. And
Whether or not he was corrupted by his use of the dark arts, or just he was born a bastard. It's never it's never really laid out, but
that's a good point. I was wondering if you knew that actually, because I was curious about that, whether that was established, that he was corrupted, because of course that's also a theme in a lot of fantasy worlds, where someone looks into something and is corrupted by it, sort of the Saruman paradigm. But yeah, and upon learning this, Vanus Galerion tried to stop Manimarco. And you guessed it, Manimarco refused to stop doing what he was doing.
Manimarco is sent on an errand into the mainland at one point, and Vanus sees this as, oh, well, he's gonna try to start some shit over there. He's gonna try to get some recruits, and so Vanus tries to, like you said, put an end to it, or at least speak to him, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And so Vanus goes back to the Psijic Order, and it's not really, again, laid out, because this does happen a long time ago, and if nobody writes it down, nobody knows about it.
Yeah, exactly.
But what we do know is that there were some disagreements, despite the fact that the Psijic Order were also fairly strongly against the use of necromancy. There were some disagreements, and so Vanus eventually left the Psijic Order in an effort to bring magic to the common person, the common man. Because up to this point,
yes.
magic was very much an aristocratic thing. People that were educated or had a lot of money, they were the ones to join the Psijic Order, or to use magic in their life. Even though we see in all the other games that magic is very much available to anybody.
And you can imagine too that coming from his background, that he would want to share to share magic with more people.
Yes.
And that sharing of magic and finding other mages to help spread the word, that became the foundations for the Mages Guild, and eventually became the Mages Guild itself, which had a very open policy. I mean, there's a really I guess Oblivion is one of the best games for observing that. The Mages Guild in Oblivion seems fairly mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
You just walk in, do some quests. Like they're very open to other magic users. But of course, this sort of thing was also it's not just to spread magic. I mean, there's I think there's part of the idea here is that it also builds kind of an army.
Yes.
I think there's some implication that there was. Now, I don't have a specific source for this, but I believe there's some implication that the Mages Guild was also used as a sort of precautionary measure against people like Mannimarco and his followers. Mm-hmm. Because some of the Psijic Order went with Mannimarco when he went out on his own, those who agreed with him.
Yes. The necromancy practitioners.
Exactly, yeah. And I think this is actually important to note that one of the things I like about the Elder Scrolls universe is how it treats concepts like good and evil and the ambiguity. Mm-hmm. We've mentioned this a little bit when we talked early on about things like the Daedric Princes and how traditional concepts of morality weren't really applicable. And you can kind of see the same thing here in a way. Mannimarco is a real evil bastard, but a lot of his ideas, like the idea of being able to explore different schools of magic without having the sort of traditional moral compass applied to it, that's not entirely a ridiculous idea. And maybe if he wasn't called the King of Worms, he might be a more sympathetic kind of character. The idea that freedom idea, I think, is something that a lot of people can probably relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in the games, you're free to use a number of necromancy spells. So
that's true.
Are you being evil if you do that? Who knows?
And is there not a couple lines of dialogue, I believe, in the College of Winterhold and Skyrim? Is there not a practitioner there of I can't remember what it is. Is it Conjuration? Who mentions that people don't look fondly on her school of magic.
I can't remember, but it sounds familiar.
Yeah, I wish I had made a note of it prior to saying something about it. Yeah.
I do vaguely remember that though.
Yeah. I think that's there. I'll definitely. I'm definitely gonna end up checking on that. But yeah, so just to talk a bit about the Mages Guild in its heyday.
Right. So Vanus goes off and he starts up this organization called the Mages Guild. People in the Somerset Isles aren't a huge fan because, like I said, magic was always a very aristocratic thing. It was a very it's a classist society, the Somerset Isles.
Yes.
And so Vanus holds a gathering. I can't think of the proper word. He basically brings in a bunch of the lords, the rulers of the Somerset Isles, and people from the Psijic Order. And it's like, hey guys, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna start up this guild and start up these halls all around the continent. Get magic out there. Maybe protect society from evildoers. Who knows? And so they agree, surprisingly, and that's how the guild is started.
Yeah, and that's also it goes on and spreads magic and does lots of important good things. But it also falls victim to a lot of sort of internal politics, as a lot of things do, and that's actually, I believe, why Vanus Galerion eventually sort of parts ways with the Mages Guild, though not
Not permanently.
not permanently. There's some sense that he has some reference to his influence still with the members of the Mages Guild, because obviously a mage who's that strong and that talented, is going to use his talents to do things, whether it's in an official capacity or not. So eventually, that's sort of the Mages Guild has its typical guild problems, and the Psijic Order it's where the Psijic Order is not done here yet. They're running sort of alongside each other.
Not necessarily rival guilds, but
No.
not cooperating either.
No, certainly not. And there was there's always suspicion of magic in Elder Scrolls history, and the fact that the Psijic Order was so isolated, as opposed to the Mage Guild, does not assist things.
No.
I believe we talked about how in our Dark Brotherhood episode we talked about the Morag Tong and a little bit about the problems they had because they had influence on powerful events. And
People don't like it when you can influence people, and a lot of people at once.
Exactly, yeah. And there was a couple recorded instances of the Psijic Order having direct influence on certain events in the Third Era. And that really does not help things. And they had reduced influence as a result of their sort of direct interference. But it's also
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's also worth noting that the Psijic Order didn't just they're isolationist. It seems odd that they participated directly in some events, but there's been some suspicion that they were sort of under duress in that participation.
Yeah, well, I think throughout history, the island of Artaeum actually disappears and reappears a number of times, without any real explanation of what happened, or what happened to cause the disappearance, or what happened during the disappearance. It just kind of vanishes and then reappears. So
in various places, I believe, right?
Yeah.
It moves around.
So they're up to something. The Psijic Order, very old, very powerful. But their part of this story kind of ends here. They don't have much more influence on the Mages Guild after Vanus leaves.
That's true, yeah. The Mages Guild becomes very much its own thing. And the Psijic Order never really fully dies out, but the rest of their... I'm obviously you do encounter them in Skyrim, which is the latest game chronologically. But in terms of their other activities around the time of Skyrim, I'm very unfamiliar with any of them. I'm not sure if they have formal record or not.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll see them in future titles. I can only hope.
I'd very much like to. So me and Andrew both are have really, really limited experience with the Elder Scrolls Online. So
I was just gonna get to that. Your favorite part here. So once the Mages Guild forms, we got about 500 years of its development and prosperity throughout the continent of Tamriel.
Yeah.
And then we get to the events of Elder Scrolls Online. Around 578, 579 of the Second Era, Manny Marco, who's still very much a guy,
of some kind, not a traditional guy.
Yeah. So he's worked his way into the Imperial Court, and he ends up tricking the current emperor into believing that through a ritual he performs with the Amulet of Kings, he can be granted, or he can be made into a Dragonborn. Because the current emperor was not a Dragonborn.
Yes.
What Manny Marco is actually doing is working for Molag Bal. right? So he corrupts
you
the
cut out
amulet.
there for a second. Can you say that? Can you say that again? What Mannimarco was actually doing?
What Manny Marco is actually doing is working with Molag Bal.
Yes, that is correct.
So through corrupting the Amulet of Kings, sorry, Molag Bal's plan is to sort of merge Nirn and Cold Harbor together.
Yeah, Cold Harbor is Molag Bal's realm of oblivion. For those who don't know.
Right. So when Manny Marco corrupts the Amulet of Kings and the Emperor performs the ritual, what happens is a soul burst. I believe that's what it's called. And I forget what the ultimate plan is called. It's plane something.
I also forget.
Plane melt.
Okay, yeah.
And that would be the event of the merging of Nirn and Cold Harbor.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So that's basically the events of ESO. Your character,
I'm not sure how much they get into, but Mannimarco and Molag Bal have a bit of a falling out.
Yeah, and you actually get together with Vanus in ESO, and you work
is that
with.
true?
Yeah,
that's
you
pretty cool.
you work with him, and Vanus personally destroys the quote unquote Great Shackle, and that's the thing that's supposed to bind Nirn and Cold Harbor together. So with that destroyed, with you helping Vanus destroy that, Molag Bal's plan is kind of torn to shreds.
Now we should mention the lore of ESO has an odd relationship, in my opinion, with the lore of the rest of the Elder Scrolls games and resources.
Which is to say, it may or may not have actually happened.
Yes, exactly. I think there's. I mean, I don't know how much we want to delve into the concept of dragon breaks.
Oh yeah, we can't get too far into that. But
yeah, we can't get too far into that because that's kind of its own rabbit hole. But yeah, suffice to say that the relationship, in my opinion, has not been made clear, and there are some specific areas of apparent, not I wouldn't say contradiction, but there are some things in Elder Scrolls Online that are very difficult to resolve with the more mainline Elder Scrolls lore. But yeah, so suffice to say, there's an issue there, and I believe Mannimarco does ultimately survive through that encounter with Molag Bal, which is very impressive because Molag Bal is very good at killing things. And
yeah, so Manny Marco survives and ends up forming another army of necromancers or undead creatures.
Yes.
Sometime later, Vanus actually leads an army of mages to confront Manny Marco's growing forces in a mountain pass. I'm not exactly sure where.
I'm also unsure of the precise location.
Yeah, so a huge battle takes place. About 1,000 people die, including Vanus, and
that is correct.
Apparently or supposedly Manny Marco, although we know he does not.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So Mannimarco. So depending upon what sort of fantasy you've delved into prior to looking at the Elder Scrolls, if any, you may or may not be familiar with the concept of a lich. And I'm not sure how many different takes on liches there have been. I'm not sure. Like, I'm very unfamiliar with a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, so I'm not sure how they treat them there. But in the Elder Scrolls universe, Mannimarco becomes the very first lich.
Right.
And you'll encounter liches in definitely in Oblivion.
Yep.
You'll
encounter the they're called worm thralls in Oblivion as well, which are servants of Manny Marco.
Yes, exactly.
And unfortunately for Vanus, his existence becomes rather pathetic after this battle. He actually becomes a worm thrall to Manny Marco.
Yeah.
So he's fated to be a zombie, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
This great creator of the Mages Guild. What's the word I'm looking for? Not creator.
Creator works. Founder.
Founder. There you go. This
Yeah.
founder of the Mages Guild ends up becoming this pathetic zombie creature,
Yeah, exactly.
serving his arch rival or
Yeah.
arch nemesis.
Yeah, this is sort of the bad guy sort of wins in this in this particular instance. But certainly and I mean to a certain extent, like you say, Skyrim's kind of a post-apocalypse game. You see what's happened to the classical Mages Guild, and in some ways, a lot of Vanis's influence is sort of lost.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, you are able to do perform necromancy and things like that. I mean, how many necromancers do you encounter in Skyrim? They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? So in terms of influence, I would actually say in a lot of ways Manny Marco's influence persists.
Oh yeah, totally.
In a more significant way than Vanis's influence does.
Yeah.
Which is sort of unfortunate. Never really thought about it till just now.
So sometime between then and Oblivion, I guess I should say Daggerfall, really. The warp in the West happens. Do you know what the warp in the West was?
I'm unfamiliar with this. Tell me about this.
I can't really. A thing happens.
Okay.
We could probably do an episode on the warp in the West. A lot of stuff happens. It's basically the end of Daggerfall. And this is another Dragon Break, unfortunately. So,
oh yes, of course, because I believe that's where Dragon Breaks were first introduced. Was
yeah, exactly. So I'll say something happens, and Manny Marco was present. So there are conflicting schools of thought on whether or not Manny Marco just ceased to exist, or moved on, or became a god. So it's it's weird because kind of all those things happen and none of those things happen, and
yeah,
maybe
Dragon Breaks
one of
are
those
a really
things happen.
tricky
Yeah.
thing. You could definitely do a whole episode on just lore devices.
Yeah,
in
really.
the Elder Scrolls universe, and things that are used to explain other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Mages Guild history in a way is more. It's odd because you think about the Thieves Guild and you think about the Dark Brotherhood, and these things sort of seem obviously nefarious. The Mages Guild is not, and yet I think it has the most troubled history out of all of them.
Absolutely.
Certainly has the most unfortunate ending. At the end, in fact, in Skyrim, in the Dark Brotherhood questline, when you finish that, you've brought the Brotherhood to, you've improved it.
Yeah.
Things are looking up.
Yeah, the Mages Guild doesn't factor into the Skyrim mage questline at all.
Not
Like,
really.
you're
No,
not-
there's no.
you're not
I mean, there's an
bringing it back,
indication. There's an indication that you're, now that you're the Archmage of the College of Winterhold, that now maybe things might look up for magic users. A short aside, by the way, about being the Archmage of the College of Winterhold.
Yeah.
When I was speaking to a friend a number of years ago, shortly after Skyrim's release, and he was a friend of mine who's studying in university, and one of the things that's where I learned that some university students see everything through the eyes of university, because he said to me, I just finished the Mages Guild questline, and now I'm the dean. The dean. Yeah, that's he didn't think it was Archmage, as dean of the College of Winterhold.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's no, and even the Thieves Guild quest line, The Thieves Guild certainly has its problems as well. But things survive a lot better than they do in the Mages Guild, and I think that shows you just the level of all the problematic things that come with magic users in the Elder Scrolls universe. They're almost never really respected.
No, and I mean, disaster always seems to follow them. So it's easy to see why people would have such a hard time, I guess, not necessarily respecting them, but trusting them.
Trusting them, I think, definitely, because at least with the Dark Brotherhood, there's a protocol.
Yeah.
And, the same with the Thieves Guild. There are rules and protocols that they follow that are well established.
Yeah. In Skyrim, the College of Winterhold is everybody is kind of wary of it because the Great Collapse, which happens a number of years before the events of Skyrim, in which case a number of storms basically ravage that entire area, but the college is left relatively unscathed.
Yes.
Everyone's kind of like, well, did those guys cause this?
Yeah, exactly.
It's... Yeah.
There's a lot of suspicion, and you can tell that just by how few students are in the college.
Yeah.
It's like 5 students.
Yeah, it's hard to see how they make a profit off of this whole system.
Not a sustainable business model.
No.
But yeah, that's kind of I've seen differing opinions on the quality of that quest line, sort of depending on what you're looking for.
Like a lot of Skyrim, a lot of really cool stuff happens.
Yes.
But not necessarily cool stuff that you do.
Lots of really cool stuff is alluded to.
Yeah.
It's, and...
Well, you get the Eye of Magnus, which has implications going all the way back to the Dawn era, and it's, if you look at the lore of that stuff, it's incredibly interesting.
Very.
But the quest design, the quest design and the quests themselves aren't nearly as interesting as the lore behind it all.
Yeah, well, I mean, Magnus is a fascinating part of Elder Scrolls history.
Yeah.
And certainly a character that we'll probably be getting into at some point or another.
Definitely.
And it's like, the Psijic Order, obviously also very interesting, and something I'd like to see more of in a future game. But it's very, surface level inspection of that sort of thing. It's it falls very much secondary, I think, in that game, especially depending upon when you do it and how you do it. I think when you do that quest line really affects, its difficulty and its feeling of significance.
Yeah.
It was actually the first place I went during my first playthrough of Skyrim.
You just made a beeline for the college?
Straight up north, yeah. Which is the only journey you can take. That's the only direction you can go. That's possible to get. Like if you go west and try to get to Markarth, you're gonna be dead before you set 5 feet.
Yeah.
It's just too dangerous. But the north journey is actually one that's possible. And so sort of my order of quest lines, Azura was one of the first things I encountered. And then, you see the College of Winterhold right after that. And it certainly felt more significant then. But then on other playthroughs, when I do that quest line, it's like, oh, right, this. Like, I'm very powerful, and this is easy.
Yeah.
I'm not using magic at all, in fact.
So, getting back to, I guess, the history.
Yes,
Two years after the Warp in the West. We're in the Third Era now. We should have mentioned that.
Yes, yeah.
The year of 431 in the Third Era. That's when Archmage Hannibal Traven is elected in the Mages Guild, and that's who the Archmage is in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion.
Yes.
He decides to implement a bunch of new policies. He changes admission. He makes admission into the guild much harder. That's why in Oblivion we have to go to each guild hall and complete a quest before we can actually be accepted into the guild.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess this was done to sort of weed out the the people that don't really know a whole lot about magic.
Yes.
Something like this maybe should have been implemented more into the Skyrim or the College of Winterhold, because you can complete that quest line without doing magic.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
But he also outlaws necromancy, which was outlawed back in the Second Era with Vanus. But it's said that he kind of brought it back, or he co-opted it back in an effort to better control it.
Right. Yes.
But Hannibal straight out outlaws it again. He bans all practice of necromancy. And so right away, half of the, or a large number of the council of the Mages Guild just leaves.
Yeah.
They
exactly.
resign. And that's part of the reason the Mages Guild in Oblivion, like you go to the what's the HQ called in Oblivion? In the Imperial City.
I should know this. I should know this.
We were doing so well, Rory.
I did this quest line quite recently as well in a playthrough of Oblivion. I'm very disappointed.
Arcane University.
That. Okay, yeah.
So that's why when you go to the Arcane University, you're expecting this. Oh man, it's like Hogwarts, but no, it's really not. There's like 20 people here max.
Yeah.
Part of the reason of that is because most or a large number of them just leave when Hannibal starts, waving his dick around after getting elected.
See, it kind of defeats the point of the Mages Guild, because then it's just the Psijic Order, basically. Like, it isn't, but it's like it's a lot of the same rules as the Psijic Order.
Yeah.
That's which is sort of not. It sort of seems to defeat the purpose to a certain extent. But even so, that you definitely get the impression that the Mages Guild is still a lot more lively in that game than it would become.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The playing the two side by side is quite interesting, but that actually that turned out to be quite a bad thing, because not only did some of the council and people leave, but that actually was great PR for Manny Marco.
Absolutely. So Manny Marco just comes back. I guess he didn't turn into a god after all.
Yeah.
Although I did see the argument made that the Manny Marco we see in Oblivion is not the same Manny Marco. It's actually just another necromancer that takes the name.
Oh, okay. That's intriguing, actually.
But
I'm not aware of that theory.
Yeah. The thing about that, though, and the thing the thing that makes me wonder if how plausible that is that he seems very he makes a worm thrall out of Vanus, and in some of the dialogue in Oblivion, he talks about how attached he's grown to Vanus, the worm thrall.
Yeah,
so
it
if this
like
was
classical Manny Marco.
Yeah, if this was a different guy, why would he care about Vanus so much?
Yes.
So
that's an excellent point, actually. That's cool. I wasn't like I say, I was not even aware of that theory. But yeah, so that's the last, with the exception we talked a bit about the Oblivion Crisis. And
throughout the Elder Scrolls 4, you're working against Manny Marco's necromancers, basically, right? Yes. That's the Mages Guild quest line in Oblivion.
Yes, and
so Hannibal ends up, giving you the title of Archmage, and he gives his life to defeat Manny Marco's army. And that's that Mage's quest line. But after the Oblivion Crisis happens, so this can be the whole Manny Marco thing could be taken as happening during the crisis. But after the crisis, the general public starts blaming magic users for the Oblivion Crisis even happening.
Yes.
And so the Mages Guild ends up being dissolved completely.
That's correct, and it's sort of a, you know, that's sort of a classical kind of scapegoating thing that happens in the Elder Scrolls world with not just magic users, but troublemakers in general.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's blaming the Morag Tong for this or blaming the Mages Guild for that. So then it becomes, I mean, it doesn't become hard for them to survive. They splinter off then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, two splinter organizations are created: the Synod,
yes.
or the Synod,
Mm-hmm.
and the College of Whispers, which is not to be confused with the College of Winterhold.
No, and those are, that's important to note that those are actually distinct things.
Mm-hmm.
And they've even tried to come together, I believe, right?
Yeah, the College of Whispers
an
has tried to work with the College of Winterhold at least once, maybe twice.
To no avail.
No. And if you read the two Elder Scrolls novels, about the whole Umbriel situation that happened, and the Synod Order was a large part of preventing catastrophe from happening there.
Mm-hmm. I've read about that a bit in the lore, but I haven't. I have not read those books myself. Actually, that's something I definitely need to get to. We should mention there are Elder Scrolls novels.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the implication here, of course. But just in case you were curious, there are Elder Scrolls novels. There, I think you can actually get them on the Bethesda store.
Yeah, they're pretty good. They're I recommend them if you're into the lore, but maybe not so much if you're not.
Yeah, if you really want to learn about the stuff, then definitely have a look into it.
The books assume a certain level of familiarity, so.
Okay. So there's some prerequisite knowledge, you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Recommended. Yeah.
You might not enjoy it as much if you don't.
Yeah, you might miss certain things, I guess.
Yeah.
Although I find sometimes, sometimes I will do something, like not necessarily with Elder Scrolls, but with something else, where I haven't done some of the prerequisite thing, but then I go back to find the prerequisite thing, and I end up, sort of reading it again with the newfound knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a classical thing. But yeah, I think that winds down everything I wanted to touch on with regards to the Mages Guild and its surrounding history of things like the Psijic Order.
Yeah.
So yeah, this would be, this was number 2 in our guild series. We hope to get the next episode out a little quicker, certainly, than this extended break we've had since episode 2. We're a little unsure what guild we're going to touch on next, but we still have to talk about the Fighters Guilds and the Thieves Guild.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more to come in the near future with regards to those. And then we could start delving into more of our audience requests and things of that nature.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for joining us on this episode of 36 Lessons in Elder Scrolls Podcast. Join us next time for more lore.
Okay, you cut out for me on my headphones. You cut out during almost all of that.
Cool. Maybe I'm being too quiet. I don't know.
I'm not sure what happened. We'll see. We're gonna be seeing the recording now and see if that came out clearly. But yeah, we'll be back and we'll have more stuff for you. Hopefully very soon.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.